Welcome to our virtual open house. Thanks for joining us. My name is Doug Vidal Hernandez. I'm part of the fellowship team here at Code for Canada, and I'm responsible for maintaining the relationships with our core team and our government partners. Feel free to introduce yourself in the chat or to ask questions as well in the question section that we have there. We'll be prompting it there throughout the presentation. We'll also have my coworker here, Nicole. She'll be moderating the questions within the Q&A. So please feel free at any moment to ask your questions in that forum, and then to please introduce yourself in the chat feature. So we're excited to have everyone here. Thanks for making the time today, amid all the wildness of COVID-19 schedules. In a different circumstance, we'd all be in the same room, potentially eating pizza together, and perhaps even having a drink. That said, I'm happy that we can at least be together here in this virtual space. We have multiple friends joining us from different time zones throughout the country. No doubt people perhaps even from outside of the country. Previously, we had our friends at Civic Tech Calgary join us for one of our previous open houses that we've had. I'm actually a former organizer with Ottawa Civic Tech, so I'd just like to give a shout out to any of the individuals out there who are out there. I'd also encourage you, though, to also look at your local Civic Tech organization that's in your city. They're kind of organized all over Canada, and there's no doubt that there's a local Civic Tech that's close to your city. Now that everything is virtual right now, you no doubt have the opportunity to at least attend any of the Civic Techs that are happening somewhere around the country in a virtual meetup. So I definitely encourage you to do that for sure. Before we dive into the agenda, I'd also like to issue a land acknowledgement that we have here. We're joining each other, like I said, from different parts of the country. Currently, all our staff members are working from home, but prior to that, our office is actually based in Toronto, our Code for Canada HQ. And Toronto, it's the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat people. Personally, myself, I'm in Ottawa right now. It's also the offices of where Transport Canada is located, where one of our panelists and current fellows, Jared, is actually from. There you go, he's waving hi right there. Ottawa itself, it's the traditional territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe Nation, and both Toronto and Ottawa are currently home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples. We extend our respect to their valuable past and present contributions on this land, and we acknowledge that we're learning, that we're growing, and that we're organizing on that same stolen land. A reconciliatory act that we've done in the past when we've hosted these open houses in person is to look at the person sitting next to you or standing next to you and ask them what you and what they have done to kind of further reconciliation. I recognize that we can't really do that here right now, given that we're all in a virtual setting, but I will still recommend before the night's over that you take that time to kind of reflect on what you've done yourself to further reconciliation in this country. If you don't know the history of the land where you're currently on, I definitely encourage you to get curious. There's actually an app called Whose Land by a Haudenosaunee developer named Mitch Holmes. So it's called Whose Land. Feel free to Google it afterwards and check out the indigenous history of the land that you're currently on. I'd also like to take a moment as well to acknowledge our solidarity with the Black Lives Matter movement. As an organization here, Code for Canada, we signed onto a joint statement against police brutality, against white supremacy, against racism. And we joined that statement with a number of other civic tech organizations as well, including Code for Japan, Code for Australia, Codeando Mexico, and Code for America, to name a few. We recognize that this is a kind of a conversation that we enter with humility. We know that our work has not been perfect on that, but it's nevertheless our responsibility to step up and to continue to make those commitments to anti-racism. That's something that I recommend that you reflect on as well, given everything that's kind of happened in current events. So here's a rundown of what to expect. Jared, our PM, who's working with Transport Canada with the Policy on Government Security, PGS, he'll be presenting. And then we'll also have Maddie Owens, who's a previous fellow and also currently working with the City of Toronto with the Big Data and Innovation team out through there. We'll start off here with a kind of brief introduction about what Code for Canada is about and a little introduction here on the fellowship. And then we'll end with a question and answer period where we'll be happy to answer any of the questions that you're posing into the Q&A field. So just a reminder, feel free to post those questions right there in the Q&A field, and we'll ensure that they get answered at the end or as we go along, depending on how it goes. So with that said, I'll give you a little brief introduction here to who we are here at Code for Canada. So Code for Canada here, we're a national nonprofit that helps governments and communities harness the power of digital. What does that mean in particular? One line that I really like that our executive director, Gabe, always uses is that our goal is to build digital capacity in government and also civic capacity in the private sector. You know, this is an effort that not only comes from the tech center, but it's also one that comes from government itself. It's something that government also needs to be willing to undertake. And our hope as Code for Canada, as that civil society organization, is to bridge that gap in between both of those different sectors and demonstrate the possibilities of what digital collaboration can look like when both tech and when the public service meet to kind of look at what digital government can provide as opportunities. If we look at the Canada Emergency Response Benefit, so the CERB, that really highlighted the proper importance of why government service delivery is so crucial. Having that quick response to be able to service Canadians was a huge aspect and a success, certainly, of the responses that this government has had with COVID-19. So when we look at digital capacity, those are kind of the things that we're looking at. We're looking at how can we quickly answer to the needs of Canadians. And we build this digital capacity through several different programs that we have here at Code for Canada. Tonight, we're going to be spotlighting the fellowship program in particular, but I'd also like to talk about some of the other programs that we have here as well. So we'll talk about fellowship. Obviously, we'll have Jared and Maddie here. They'll be talking about that in a moment. And I'll give a little brief introduction as well. But I also wanted to give a little time to talk about our other aspects that we have here. So our community network, that's kind of actually how I first got introduced, was through the civic tech ecosystem as an organizer for civic tech. And it's something that as Code for Canada, we host a organizers call that happens once a quarter, where all civic tech organizers across the country kind of connect together, and we're able to provide that forum for them. There's our education and training that we have, and sort of our education program enables different communities and governments to put that technology and design to work. We through that education program, we have like a variety of different trainings and workshops to help public servants get familiar with the tools of digital method. One thing that we also have as well is what we call Grit Toronto. So it's gathering residents to improve technology. If you're interested in that in particular, our program lead on that, Marissa Bernstein, would be certainly happy to talk to you about that. The whole idea really is to connect individuals who are creating technology with those diverse and sometimes underrepresented communities to help test their products in a way that perhaps previously they wouldn't be able to. And then we also have Civic Hall Toronto, which fosters that collaborative spirit in between governments here in the city of Toronto. And those are kind of the different avenues that we have here at Code for Canada to be able to further that digital capacity. So let's talk a little bit here about the fellowship program in particular. So the fellowship program starts where we embed digital individuals in government to work on those projects that matter. And I'll highlight those particular projects for this upcoming cohort in just a moment. We have individuals that work as developers, as user experience designers, and as product managers. Both Jared and Maddie are both PMs, and they joined our fellowship as PMs. The duration of the fellowship itself is over a 10-month period, where they're collaborating with their specific government hosts to design those digital services. So if you look here at the specific process and the timeline of the fellowship, you'll see here that we have our 3 C4C fellows, our UX designer, our PM, and our developer, who are co-located within their respective government partners. Previously, we've had partners at the municipal level with the City of Toronto, at the provincial level with the Government of Ontario, and naturally with the federal government in Canada. They're put into those respective departments for the duration of 10 months, where they undergo a number of different user research, prototype that, test it, and then repeat that process. So the idea really is to be able to collaborate with those government partners and identify those specific challenges that they have been struggling to get to. Um, After that, we then also look at the digital product or the service, depending on what it is that the fellows themselves are focusing on. And in addition to bring in those digital tools, that sort of is what acts as the catalyst or as the medium through which we're able to build that digital capacity within the public service itself. If we look here at the fellowship itself, we want to demonstrate what's possible within that 10-month period. So our first month is dedicated toward onboarding, where we're able to prepare fellows for a number of different scenarios and kind of explore what it is that initial challenge within their government department will be. The first couple of months are dedicated towards that user research and prototyping. And then right now, in the current fellowship that we're at about month 7. And that's where we kind of build, test, revise, and repeat. At that point, then for the final couple of months will be the transition phase, where we're able to share that information back towards government partners. So the idea really is for the fellowship to break down those silos between public servants and contribute towards that increased trust and that investment within government technology. So these are actually some of our 2020 fellows right here. You'll actually see Jared's picture right there doing a good impression of Blue Steel right in there. But we have a number of different fellows who are working all across the federal government and the provincial government as well here. So we have two teams within Transport Canada, one within the Marine Safety Division and one within the Security Division, specifically PGS, which is called the Policy on Government Security. And then we also have a provincial team with OMAFRA, what's called the Ontario Ministry of Agricultural, Farming and Rural Affairs. And then we have a team as well with Measurement Canada, which is an agency of ISED. It's called the Innovation, Science and Economic Development. So what we're looking for specifically in fellows is obviously designers, developers, and product managers. But in addition to that as well, we are looking for soft skills as well. We're looking for individuals who are highly collaborative, for those who are adaptable and resilient, who have the ability to communicate, and to use their have that motivation to use their skills to make life better for Canadians in particular. That's a big aspect of that as well. For cohort 5, we have 3 different government departments that we'll be working with. So the Canada Energy Regulator, the team that'll be working with CER, they'll be working to help the organization support and enhance how it consults with the stakeholders and Indigenous peoples on the energy products and projects, such as pipelines, power lines, anything that has to do with energy development that the federal government of Canada regulates. How that information is presented back towards the public and Indigenous peoples, that's the kind of work that the fellows will be doing to ameliorate and facilitate that process. The Canadian Armed Forces Transition Group will actually be helping individuals in the military who are transitioning back into civilian life ameliorate that experience. So every year between 10 and 12,000 individuals in the armed forces leave the military and come back to civilian life. And there's a number of processes that make that a bit of a difficult and cumbersome experience for some individuals. So the fellows who are going to be stationed there will actually be playing that key role in building that one-stop shop for those outgoing members and their families, so they're able to access education, training, and healthcare once they enter back into civilian life. And then we'll have 2 teams with Employment and Social Development Canada. So there's 2 teams that we're recruiting for that there in particular. As a fellow for ESDC, the work that you'll be doing there will be to make the department more responsive to community needs and voices, and give residents that autonomy over how they interact with public benefits. So CERB, that's one of those public benefits in particular. That's one thing that when we talk about having proper government service delivery, that's one of those things that we really want to focus on in particular in terms of how it's done. And then finally, I kind of just want to show you here the fellowship team in particular. So normally we dedicate a bit of section after the event where we'd be able to socialize and you'd be able to put, a face to the names. Under a virtual setting, this is kind of your best bet, unfortunately. So I'm here right now. Like I said, my name is Hernandez. I'm one of the coordinators here with the fellowship team on the government relations side of things. So for myself in particular, I coordinate a lot of the check-ins with those government partners, specifically the ones that I just mentioned there, CER, CAFDG, and ESDC. I have my coworker Flavi. His role in coaching and support he'll always be a constant point of contact with the fellows during the fellowship itself. And then we have our fellowship program lead. So she previously worked in another fellowship program actually, and she helps us keep it organized and structured. One last thing I have to say is, obviously, if you have any questions outside of this, do feel free to reach out to us. My email is doug@cohohort.ca. That said, a lot of the questions that you may have will no doubt probably be on cohohort.ca/apply. You see that link right up there. But do feel free to reach out to us if you have any questions on that. We would gladly welcome any questions on that. So without further ado, I'll give it then to Jared then, if that's all right. And he'll talk about his experience.
Thanks, Doug. All right. So hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us today for today's open house. My name is Jared, and I'm the product manager with the Transport Canada team. I'll be covering 5 topics over the next 15-ish minutes, everything from what Transport Canada is to our problem space, some of the challenges we faced, and the wins that have excited us so far. So let's get into it. Transport Canada is a massive federal department that has a breadth of responsibilities. There are close to 1 million individuals working in the transportation sector in Canada. Transport Canada is responsible for 10 million square kilometers of the world's largest coastline, as well as 1.13 million kilometers of public roads. But more importantly, TC's aim is to transport people and goods safely. So if you've ever taken a plane, train, or boat, you've been impacted by their policies and programs. So why the partnership between Transport Canada and Code for Canada? Well, anyone that works at TC, Transport Canada, has to undergo a security screening check. And this involves employees, contractors, and even summer students. The purpose is to assess your reliability and or loyalty to Canada. Now, the challenge with the security screening check is that the process is very cumbersome and complex for all users involved. It's heavily paper-based that requires a lot of back and forth communication between TC and the applicant. And to be blunt, it's a pretty painful experience. But many of you may have had to go through a similar process for previous jobs. And if any of you join C4C as a fellow, I'm almost certain that you'll have to go through the security screening check. But that was good news for us involved in this problem space as fellows. We were able to experience firsthand what the real process was like as an applicant, and this was incredibly useful. So we wrapped up our market and user research about a month or 2 ago, and there were 2 questions that came up that were somewhat mirrors of one another. On one hand, we had applicants that wanted clarity on the security screening process. They wanted to know what they had to do, how to complete the task, what's next, and where they are in the overall process. On the other hand, we had HR and hiring managers at TC, so the security screening personnel that lacked consistent security screening processes. So when one employee was on leave, the other person resuming those duties didn't know exactly what had to be done. So this created a very inconsistent experience for the applicants. Now, answering the questions or problems for these 2 became our product focus. However, there was something else that came up during our research that has implications not just for TC, but for the broader government as a whole. And now, getting different teams to talk to one another is challenging enough, but to get different departments to work together is extremely challenging, yet important. So we wanted to know if it's possible to leverage other governments' data to create a more seamless, automated experience that strengthens compliance. And this forms the basis for our process focus. So to reiterate, we have a product and a process focus. We named our product Atlas since it helps navigate and guide the applicant through the security screening process with customized auto-generated communications. It helps to provide a consistent experience that aligns with policy, eliminating the need for all the back and forth communication. For a process focus, our goal here is to develop a framework for data sharing across government departments. Again, not an easy task, but high value if executed. We feel that governments at all levels can improve service delivery with greater communication with one another. Now, we've definitely had our challenges along the way. I understand that COVID-19 has impacted everyone on this planet, and we are no exception. I put this down in the context of our project because on day one of quarantine was our first day of discovery and our first day with the new team. So conducting market and user research during all of this was very interesting, as well as working remotely with the team. There are unique constraints when working within government, especially when dealing with security. You can't simply research online for processes and best practices for security screening. And there's a reason for that. There are policies, acts, and regulations that dictate what you can and cannot do, as well as there are a number of government partners that play key roles within the security screening process, and changing their service delivery models are not within scope. There's also real risk in getting security screening wrong. So trying to balance what the applicant wants and needs with policy compliance is something that we constantly have to weigh. And there's definitely some wins that we're excited about. User research is definitely picking up within the government and exposing our government partners to the user research process, the importance of talking and listening to end users, and seeing them learn and gain from that has been extremely valuable for us and also very important for them. More importantly, removing silos across government departments. We've had a number of meetings set up across federal departments, but also more recently with provincial ministries. So we're looking at setting up a proof of concept with Ontario Digital Services and the Ministry of Transportation and an information sharing agreement for data exchange there. Now, shipping a product or features or an outcome is cool and all, but you have 9 months deployed with this team, with individuals that you've never met before, you've never worked with before. And the same thing with your government partners. So something that we're very proud of is the team dynamics and how far we've come and the team cohesiveness that exists today. And I think I speak for everyone whenever I say that. So Doug, that's pretty much all I have right now, and I'll pass it back to you.
Yeah, I appreciate that. So I see there's been a number of individuals that have put in a couple questions in here. Feel free to continue to put in those questions. I'll actually allow Maddie to speak and talk about her experience as a fellowship partner who finished her fellowship back in March, I want to say, actually, I guess, of this year. March seems like such a long time ago now, to be perfectly honest, and it may as well have been like decades ago. But in any case, please continue to put in your questions into the Q&A section. I'll answer them actually after Maddie has finished her session and speaking about her experience in the fellowship. So with that, Maddie, I'll give it to you.
Thanks so much, Doug. I don't have any slides to share today, just myself. Also, we had a huge storm in Toronto today, so hopefully my Wi-Fi holds up for you. So again, my name is Maddie, and I was a part of the 3rd cohort of COHORT Canada Fellows. I'm in Toronto, so I'm located in Toronto right now. So for those of you who've applied or are thinking about applying to become a fellow, I was in your shoes about 1.5 years ago now. At the time, I was working at a really small startup, and I was working with a group of people that I loved dearly, but deep down, I felt like something was missing, which I realized over time was motivation and finding purpose in my day-to-day work. So when the fellowship came up, a friend shared it with me. I applied for it, and realized that joining the fellowship was the right thing for me to do because it was my opportunity to make a really, really big impact every single day. So my team was based in Ottawa with Public Services and Procurement Canada, and we were tasked with the challenge of reimagining federal government business travel, which is no small task because there are about 350,000 federal public servants, many of whom have traveled for work at some point in their career, travel regularly for work, or will do at some point. I realize now with the pandemic and with COVID-19 that there's a lot less travel happening, but there are still a lot of really key functions in government across the 90 or 100 different departments and agencies that people have to travel for, and there's really no option. It's not discretionary or like going to a conference. You can attend that virtually, but some travel, like inspecting a ship coming into Canadian waters, you have to travel for. So very early on in my fellowship, my team realized that the project was in a very exploratory phase. And as tech and design professionals that are very, very used to building and shipping software, we quickly found the way to bridge the gap between kind of blue sky thinking and design exploration and shipping software was to flex our skills and abilities by prototyping. So that way we could take past research that our government partners had done. We could take the results of research that we were doing as well, build really quick prototypes and learn very quickly with low effort and low investment what would work for the future of travel, and more importantly, what wouldn't work and what we should park and kind of move past. So we did countless hours of UX research, talked with hundreds of public servants, and the outcome of that research fed into the development over the course of our fellowship of 6 to 7 really high fidelity prototypes that showed what the future of government business travel could look like. Through that, we were able to demonstrate that prototyping and consulting with users and talking with our users every single day and iterating on our designs and our prototypes could really help de-risk major multi-million-dollar projects. Over the course of our fellowship as well, we were able to use modern open source technologies like for the developers out there, Vue, Node, and Postgres, and all our code is still available publicly on GitHub. So going back to that piece that I spoke about purpose and impact, through our work, we've influenced the future of the travel program to save those 350,000 federal public servants collectively thousands of hours of time so that they can focus on more meaningful work of serving Canadian residents, like launching the CERB program that Doug talked about. And I feel very, very proud that we were able to make a small impact, but at scale. I'm also really proud, one kind of highlight for me of the fellowship was we were able, in partnership with one of our government partners, to introduce Slack to our government partner team so that we could work kind of more seamlessly and communicate more accessibly with one another. And the last 2 weeks of our fellowship were done remotely because of the pandemic. And so making that transition from working in the office every day to working remotely was really seamless because we had Slack up and running and there was no transition for us. Another aspect of the fellowship that I'd really like to talk about though, and that was really important to me, was my personal and professional growth. The fellowship gave me a ton of opportunities to expand my network and dig into different communities in the digital government and civic technology space that I didn't even know existed before. And I love what Doug said earlier about building civic capacity in the private sector, because I think that's a great example of that. I didn't really know that working in the government was accessible to me in the way that the fellowship has made it accessible to me. So some of those great communities that I was able to tap into and expand my network into, to name a few, are the GC Digital community on Twitter is really, really big and engaged, Civic Tech Ottawa, the Canadian Digital Service, to name a few. I was also able to really grow my communication skills because a core principle of Code for Canada and a big part of the fellowship is working in the open. So my team blogged weekly. You can find us. I'll share a link after, but we were doing weekly blogs and really engaging on Twitter and connecting with people across the federal public service. Another part of professional growth for me was working on a small team of 3 people. You have a lot of autonomy and a lot of responsibility. And a big part of that was jumping in and switching hats and picking up the slack for your teammates when they need help, and also asking your teammates to jump in and do things that are outside of their domains, and also getting out of your comfort zone and working outside of your domain. So for us, because our fellowship project was highly exploratory, we did a lot of user research sessions. And so I feel like it really accelerated my growth as a PM, because I was able to really practice over and over again what user-centered design was, and really internalize what that was, and get a ton of breadth and depth in that space that I wouldn't have gotten in other positions that I've had in my career. So finally, on the kind of professional and personal growth piece, I was able to just learn the ropes of working in the public sector, managing numerous stakeholders on a project with different requirements that can be conflicting, but are all very, very important, and working on a really complex project. So that kind of leads me to where I am now. After the fellowship, I was planning on taking a few months off to travel. COVID threw a wrench in those plans, but I'm really lucky that an exciting opportunity came up. So right now, as Doug mentioned earlier, I'm working with the City of Toronto's Big Data Innovation team within the Transportation Services Department. And I'm working with a small team on, a new software called Move. And Move is a replacement, a cloud-based application that's a replacement for some really old legacy software systems that store the city's transportation data. More specifically, they currently store when a crash happens on Toronto city streets. They store all the information about minor to major crashes, and also counts of vehicles and pedestrians moving through Toronto. And that data is used by many teams across the city for city planning, and also just to make our streets safer, and install interventions like bike lanes or pedestrian crosswalks. So I don't think I would have found this opportunity without the fellowship. I didn't know that even growing up in the city, I didn't know that working at the City of Toronto was an option for me. And going through the fellowship experience really gave me the tools in my wheelhouse to learn the ropes of government and hit the ground running with the job I'm doing now. So I'm excited to share too that we're leading up to the launch of Move in production in August. So it's been really interesting to explore a project from the complete opposite end, where during the fellowship we were doing a lot of design exploration, and now I am over on the side of implementation and iteration. So yeah. With that, I think I will hand the mic back to Doug.
Thank you, Maddie. Appreciate that. Appreciate both of you folks. All right, so I've seen there's a number of people who have put questions here in the Q&A section. Feel free to keep putting them in here. I'm going to start answering a couple of them. I also want to highlight that we have here a current fellow as well. He's also mentioned in the chat, Keith. And he's also put his contact information in there as well if you guys have questions about the fellowship or about his experience in particular. There's also a couple questions in there that have been put into the chat. If those people who have put their questions into the chat could just put them into the Q&A section, that'd be helpful for me to organize them. But if not, I'll get to your question at the end, if that's okay. So we have a question here from an anonymous attendee. Do most fellows have or require hard digital skills? So what I'll say for that is yes, there is still a technical aspect naturally towards the fellowship. I highlighted the soft skills because that's something that I wanted to ensure that applicants also have. But there is a technical aspect of the interview process during the fellowship itself. And when you're tackling the challenges and the problems within your respective government department, naturally, your government team will look to you to have the answers on how to build those technical products, or look to you to lead some of the workshops in terms of like what is agile. One fellow actually currently right now with the provincial OMAFRA team, that's the Ontario Ministry for Agricultural, Food and Rural Affairs. He's actually led a couple of workshops on what Agile is. We've had different UX designers with the Measurement Canada team talk about, what is some design 101 skills that perhaps he could show to government departments. We do ask that fellows have those hard skills as well when they are applying to it. Maddie or Jared, I don't know if you guys want to talk about your particular skill set as PMs when you guys were applying to the fellowship.
Yeah, I guess like my employment experience, I have a mix of both public and private. So on the public side, I've held roles at both the federal and provincial level as a business analyst / financial analyst. And that, looking back, that's really helped navigate government decision making. It could be quite different private to public. On the private side, I worked for a tech startup in Toronto called Kiwi.ai. I was a product manager there. And then I was also a product manager for a small real estate tech company, also based in Toronto. In terms of hard skills, I have basic Python experience, but yeah, that's kind of my experience in a nutshell. Maddie, do you want to chime in?
Yeah, I definitely come at it from a different side. I did my education in engineering, so I have a lot of technical background. But I think what's interesting about Jared, the way Jared got into it, is that he has like the government experience, where I came into this experience with a lot more of the technical side. And I think that both of those are really equally important, because a lot of making progress is not only about having those technical skills and knowing a bunch of programming languages, or being able to build an app, but it's really about navigating government and managing the project and knowing who to talk to push it through. So I think that both of those are equally important. And one other thing I'll add is another PM in my cohort hadn't had digital experience before, but she was able to, through her experience in a lot of knowledge translation work and communication work, she was able to make a huge impact on her project as well. So I think that there's opportunity for people of all different kinds of backgrounds to be successful.
Thanks, folks. Next question. I really apologize if I say your name incorrectly. Yaimi. Two questions from this individual. Do the fellows have some particular technical requirements, specific platforms or languages for the participants? The answer to that really is no. We specifically don't ask them to have requirements in specific languages because oftentimes the government partners themselves aren't sure. So that's usually for the developer side. We always ask for full stack developers so that they have the ability to what we're really asking for is here to have like strong problem solving skills. We're not asking you to specifically to have knowledge in any one specific language, but rather just to have strong problem solving skills so that you're able to adapt to the specific tech stack of that government partner. When we put out the applications and in the job descriptions themselves, we do purposely leave out what languages we're asking fellows to specialize in. Because what we prefer more is rather individuals to have those problem solving skills that they're able to pivot depending on the needs of that government department. So it isn't something that's specifically listed out in the job description. Second question by that same individual is, can permanent residents participate in the fellow selection process? The question is yes. We do actually, in the application itself, we do ask that as a question. Citizens, permanent residents, individuals who have working visas in the country are all welcome to apply. Maddie, maybe you could speak to this too. I guess it's more of a question for Mike, I suppose, in particular. But Mike, who was the developer fellow within Maddie's team at PSPC, the government department that she was at, is actually from Australia, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, so he was coming in here, and Maddie, yourself as well, if I'm not mistaken, like you were out in the US when you made your application. So we do have individuals coming in from different areas of both the world and the country as well. And as long as you're able to have a work permit to work within the country itself, that's really all that we ask for that. The only reason we ask that ahead of time in particular is because you will be working with the government department, and as such, you will require to get security clearance. So that's the reason why we ask that, so that we can properly fill out that paperwork ahead of time and kind of avoid some of those headaches and the bureaucracy that naturally has to deal with any of that. Next question here from Van. So what's next for a member after the fellowship? Is it possible to apply for the fellowship as my first job? Is it open for postgraduate work permit holder? As long as you have, like I said, as long as you have a work permit, that's fine. I'd have to clarify on the postgraduate one in particular, because I'm not sure what the limitations of that one are. So you're welcome to reach out to us like privately afterwards, Van, and we can kind of clarify on what we're looking for on that. I'm not sure of the limitations of the postgraduate work permit in particular, but what we do ask is that people have work permits that extend at least until the end of September of 2021, which would be the end of the fellowship when that will be concluding. In terms of applying as your first job, normally what we say is that we're looking for individuals who have about like 1 or 2 years of experience in whatever field that they're applying for, either as a dev, as a UX designer, or as a product manager. If you have like some particular experience that you think would be reflective, that you think would be appropriate, I definitely welcome you to apply. I'm the one, including with the other 2 members, Flavi and Meha, who I showed there earlier, who are going through all the applications. So when I see yours in that stack, I'll make sure to know. But like I said, normally we're looking for individuals who have about 1 to 2 year experience. But that isn't like the only limiting factor, to be perfectly honest. We have a number of individuals who have applied, and what we're looking for is a combination of those soft skills and those hard skills that I mentioned before. All right, next question by another anonymous attendee. What is the process to select the team members? Great question. So the interview process itself consists of both of a number of processes. One is submitting, obviously, your application. After that, we'll send you a skill testing question in particular. After that skill testing question, we'll invite you to the first interview in particular, and then there'll be a technical interview, with the last stage being the group aspect of it. And so at that group interview stage, what we're looking for is your ability to work in a team. Like Maddie had mentioned, you're working with a small team of basically 3 individuals, right? Like if you are the dev, then you're working with a UX designer or a PM. And if you're the UX designer, then you're working with a dev or a PM. You have your government team there to support you in a number of those aspects, but a lot of the work is being done by that small core team in particular. And so the group stage of the interview process, really, we're looking for your abilities to work in a team in particular. And we kind of want to balance a number of different, personalities when that decision is being made. It isn't really like a science, to be perfectly honest, in terms of like how a team is situated. It's something that we certainly ask during the interview, that we wanted to ask during the interview process, like what is the best way that you can work in particular, and certainly get your input if you make it to that stage of the application. So that's something that we can talk about if you make it to that stage of the interview process. So anonymous attendee, I hope you apply. Calvin, next question. Sorry if it's mentioned, will the fellowship be completely remote? If so, is it okay to apply if you are out of province or in a different city? That's a great question. So one of the things that we have always really firmly believed about is the co-located aspect of working within your government department. And so in years prior, we've always asked that they be working physically within their government department. It's a much different experience working remotely than it is physically being in that department and physically being able to see the work that your coworkers in the government department are doing. naturally, like COVID-19 has put a wrench in a lot of those plans. And it's also shown us that like it is possible to do remote work. What we're saying right now, we don't obviously know like where COVID will be when the fellowship starts come November. Obviously, we recognize there's a number of individuals who are expecting some level of a second wave, and we're hugely cognizant of that for sure. Um, we're asking individuals to co-locate to the particular department that they're going to be in, but we definitely recognize that there's going to be at least a section of the fellowship that will be remote from potentially the beginning of it. And that's something that, you know, if you're not physically located within Ottawa or Calgary, then we can address for sure in terms of like your comfortableness with traveling to a different city. But at its core, one thing that we've always really talked about within the Code for Canada Fellowship is the aspect of being co-located, because you're not just a contractor. Even though I'm sure Maddie and Jerry can say some government departments just look at them as if they're just contractors. And an aspect of the fellowship is ensuring that those mentalities and that mindset is changed, because that isn't what the fellowship is about. It's not just you coding something in particular and giving the product. There's a much deeper aspect to that where we are looking to build that digital capacity. And personally, we don't feel that it can be done in the same way if it is remote. But you know, that's something that we're kind of exploring at the same time too. That said, at least for now, I just want to manage expectations and say that the expectation for right now still is for individuals to be based in Ottawa or Calgary, even though we definitely recognize that there will be a portion of the fellowship that very well will be remote. Next question here from Stephanie. For the C4C folks, how do you select the partners that will become fellows? That is a great question. So it's a very lengthy process. Really, it's about over a year, depending on the government partner, to be perfectly honest, from like the genesis of the first meeting to actually signing the paperwork and then obviously welcoming the 3 fellows into that government department. Some departments come to us, to be perfectly honest. We've been very fortunate that we've had many great partners along the way, and the word kind of gets around that we've been able to you know, have a number of fellowships. Sometimes we seek that fellow, or sorry, that government partner, because we want to work with them in particular. And sometimes, usually, it's kind of a combination of both. That's kind of our partnerships team. That's kind of their main responsibility, is scoping out both those partners in terms of like who the fellows themselves will be working with, what is the challenge that the fellows will be focusing on when they get there, and then kind of ensuring that there is that level of capacity and that willingness from that government partner to work with those fellows as well, because there will be pushback. We're not going to lie. There's always individuals who are hesitant to change, and we kind of want to be able to navigate that space certainly as best as we possibly can. But there's certainly challenges. That's a whole aspect of digital government and of navigating that space, is to be able to have that willingness to change, but to also recognize that some people are going to be a little bit more difficult to change in that in particular. So it's definitely a big, lengthy process for sure. If I want to say something about CER, the Canada Energy Regulator, they were actually a partner in the previous cohort. So in the cohort that Maddie was a part of, in cohort 3, and the partner that Jared is working with, Transport Canada, has also worked in a previous cohort, in cohort 2. So that said, like, Transport Canada is a massive department. The drone regulation team that was in cohort 2, the security team that Jared's a part of, and the marine safety team that Keith, who I mentioned in the comments, is around here, is a part of, are all vastly different. And each one is very unique, is what I'll say. Each government department is definitely very unique. Another question from another anonymous attendee. It seems to me that the fellowship is like a lab where teams incubate and build something. Can you talk more about the hours of work you needed to dedicate? That's a great question, and I'm going to punt that one to the 2 individuals that we have here, Jared and Maddie, who will probably be better situated to answer that question.
Sure, thanks, Doug. We typically work 8 hours a day, government hours. Actually, on the first day, the designer Jude on my team sat us down and he did a team charter of expectations about how he likes to work, what he expects from team members, and so forth. And one of the items on that list was ideally we don't want to be exhausting ourselves working overtime all the time, but we will if we have to. And that was kind of something that we agreed upon. Yeah, the work hours are pretty flexible, especially working remote. I did some work on Canada Day, and last Thursday I worked till 10 p.m., but there's other days that we wrap up around 3. So it's kind of, it's not necessarily the amount of hours, more so about the deliverables and the outcomes.
Yeah, I would echo everything that Jared just said. Typically, we try to be in the office at during the hours that our partners were, because as Doug mentioned, a lot of it is being on site and really building that change from within. But I think sometimes I woke up earlier or stayed a late night, but that was kind of a personal choice of mine to do that. And yeah, we tried to focus a lot more on outcomes versus output. Yeah, so focusing on the impact you're making as opposed to the number of hours you're putting in.
Thanks, folks. Next question here from another anonymous attendee. How many team members per product? Is it the typical dev team of 5 to 9 people? Do you use Scrum as a framework? So how many team members per product? It's 3. So it's the designer, the developer, and the product manager. Within the government department itself, sometimes it is the case that they have additional capacity as like developers or as designers. But sometimes the government department's technical team consists of the 3 fellows, and that's kind of it. It's not as intensive as perhaps other teams in the private sector if you're coming in from that you may be used to. Depending on the team, Scrum is actually used as a framework. I'm sure the transport teams here can talk about that in particular. It really depends at what level of digital capacity the federal team is. Some are very early on in that process and don't actually know much about what that even means. And like I said, very much will rely on you as fellows to answer some of those questions. Some are a little bit further on along that process and have some level of knowledge of what digital means and like what is Agile, what is Scrum. That really depends on the government partner themselves.
Can I jump in and add something to that?
Please.
I actually wrote, I linked the blog that my fellowship team kept up during our fellowship in the chat. But I wrote a blog on introducing Agile rituals to a non-development team. So our team was not delivering software at a regular cadence, but was much more in the design exploration phase. So I dug into that a little bit and the different capital A Agile frameworks that you could and couldn't introduce to your team. But we definitely work in a lowercase Agile way. So a lot of iteration and design research.
Cool. Thanks, Maddie. Another question here from an anonymous attendee. Will UX designers, researchers have the opportunity to help code the prototype if they have the experience? Yeah, no doubt. Like if you have that experience and you want to help your dev along that process, like I said, it's only 3 of you. I will say you obviously have the support of your government team on that process, but a lot of that technical aspect is like it does rely on you. That said, if you have that capability, by all means, please feel free to contribute to the team on that front for sure. Next question here from Tessra. What was the 1-month onboarding process like? Great question. Do either one of you folks want to take that actually?
Yeah, I'd love to jump in. Before the fellowship, I didn't really understand why we needed a month to onboard. I've never spent that much time onboarding to a job before. But coming out of it, I really understood why, because onboarding covers everything from how does government work in Canada to what is an API and what are the kind of tech basics you need to know and how do you communicate those to government partners and everything under the sun that you could need. So it's a really thorough and very, very enjoyable experience to get to meet your fellow fellows as well and learn from the Code for Canada team.
I'll just jump in here. Yeah, the onboarding experience is definitely a month. I'll be very honest. A component of that onboarding is the sprint. And I think that is probably the most, or for us at least, was incredibly valuable because we were able to figure out very quickly how we worked individually and as a team and kind of resolve those conflicts or those debates before being deployed to the government partners. And as a result of that, like I think our team is incredibly stronger now because of that. So that, yeah, the onboarding sprint's great.
Thanks, folks. Another question here. Do applicants need to be familiar with the government agencies that they're paired with? Is experience with that specific sector necessary to be considered? For example, if you have experience with the energy background, will that be useful for CER, for the Canada Energy Regulator? No. To be perfectly honest, you don't need to have any experience with that particular government department at all. In fact, I would say none of the fellows had perhaps any experience with the government departments at all, besides like knowing kind of a very vague idea of what they do. Your government partner is there to support you along that process and both introduce you to the specifics of that agency and facilitate a lot of the relationships with who you need to talk to in terms of building that digital capacity. And one of the things that we do have during onboarding, relevant to the previous question, was around kind of doing a little brief government 101 so that you can kind of get the idea of how to navigate government, because we totally recognize that for the first time, a number of these individuals may be in government for the very first time. And so obviously, like any industry, there's a number of jargon and, acronyms that is very prevalent in government that you'll get to learn for the first time. And we don't have any expectation whatsoever that you need to know that ahead of time. That's something that can be learned as you progress through the fellowship itself. This is a question for Jared and Maddie from Gabriella. Do you have any advice to candidates who could possibly be completing the fellowship entirely under COVID-19?
So I think, so at TC, they're pretty digitally advanced in terms of like their software, how their teams operate, Scrum, Agile. But I think the key thing is finding those, and others might reiterate this, but finding those champions within the government, whether it's COVID-19, whether you're working remotely or not, it's really important to find those people that will support your product or service or whatever during your fellowship, but more importantly afterwards. So find those people very early is my advice.
I only had to do 2 weeks of my fellowship remotely. So I don't specifically have advice around the fellowship, but I still work in government at the municipal level. And I think that one of the key pieces that makes the team that I'm on right now work so well is just a channel for communication that everybody's on board with. So the team that I'm embedded on right now, we have a Slack that is alive and everyone is in there continuously throwing jokes in there and kind of filling in the gaps on those like water cooler talk like things that and the aspects of getting to know people that come outside of formal meetings and formal exchanges. So that's been really key for our team. So I think that's would be really important for any team, especially the fellowship where you're kind of dropped in there for 10 months and there's support from your government partners, but building those relationships is really key.
Well, I shouldn't be cognizant of time. It is 8 o'clock. If Jared or Maddie, if you guys are okay for staying for another like 5-10 minutes, so just a couple more questions. Perfect. Thank you very much, folks. Then we'll get this wrapped up by 8:10 at the latest. Just to answer a couple of the last questions that are here. For any of the other questions, if we don't have a chance to answer them, like I said, feel free to send myself a email. I think Nicole in the chat put my email in there somewhere. So feel free to look and parse through that chat and it'll be in there. Question from Camille here. How have the projects led by fellows been sustained after the fellows leave? So that's a great question. one thing that we really want to focus on, we have a monitoring and evaluation lead here at Code for Canada. And one of the things that we want to look at in terms of the fellowship is not just like the 10-month duration of the fellowship, but also like the 12-month duration of that entire process and the 24-month duration of that process. And what does it look like well after the fellows have left? I know Jared is still currently in the fellowship, and we've only just started through what's called the charter addendum, which is where we kind of talk about like the risks and how to mitigate them post fellowship. I don't know, Maddie, you have just finished your fellowship back in March. Are there any things that you want to talk about that process? I know Mike, if I'm not mistaken, is still at PSPC working with that team in particular, who was the developer fellow within Maddie's team.
Yeah, I'd love to jump in on this one. One thing I didn't get a chance to mention was that 2 of the prototypes that we generated out of that bucket of 6 to 7 prototypes over the course of the fellowship that I had, they're actually, Mike is the developer fellow I worked with on my team. He stayed on with our government partner, and he is facilitating 2 of those prototypes to become real products and become more widely available. So I think that's a pretty good success rate, that 2 out of 6, 2 out of 7, they're actually taking through to production now and scaling up. So I think that's a pretty good signal that the project is going to be sustained and live on and provide further impact. And I think the other piece of that is just the capacity piece around bringing in new ways of working and shifting from a project to a product mindset. And we did a lot of knowledge transfer at the end of our fellowship to our government partners, and there are champions there who will continue that work. So I have a lot of confidence that it's not just about taking the prototype that we generated and having them see it through to a product launch, but actually I think we've given them the skills and worked together enough that they'll continue to develop based on that foundation.
Thank you, folks. So I'll make this the last question that I'll answer here. For a number of you, Luke, I know, has been answering questions within the chat itself. If you still have a question after this that hasn't been answered, like I said, feel free to message me afterwards, and I'd be more than happy to answer that question. So this will be the last question here for the evening. And it's from Jay. And it's around, are the final deliverables always technology-based, or is there a scope for social and process-based solutions as well? 100%. One thing that we don't want to do is just take a paper form and put it online, essentially replicating the same problems and issues that paper process has and simply putting a digital like veneer over it. What we want to do is obviously also change the reasons why that form needs to exist. I know Jared in particular, in one of the previous projects that I had, was looking at how we can ameliorate the form specifically that transport security uses within airports and at ports. It's a very lengthy form, and one of the things that we didn't want to just do is take that form and put it online, because then you just replicate the entire process and you just can do it through the internet. So there's definitely an entire element to the fellowship. When we talk about building that digital capacity, it's not just about ensuring that they know, like, I don't know, what JavaScript is and what HTML and CSS are, but it's also about how do we ensure that the processes in the way that they currently do their work is done in a way that can help the individuals and those users that they're supposed to serve. I'm not sure if you wanted to add anything to that, Jared, or?
No, yeah, you touched upon everything. It's not necessarily always the product. For example, or taking a paper-based application and moving it online. That was one of the issues that we faced, but through our user research, we found that applicants lacked clarity. Like, they had no idea what was involved in the process, what was expected of them. So we're working on guiding and navigating the applicant through the process, not just the application phase, through fingerprints, security briefing, interviews, and so forth. So giving them relevant information when they need it. But yeah, Doug covered everything.
Cool. Thank you, everyone. If you see there in the chat, Nicole put our Twitter code or at code4ca. And of course, the link to apply, which is code4.ca/apply. In that link there, you'll have my email in there. It's in the FAQ section on the details. So feel free to message me as well. Thank you very much for attending, and I genuinely appreciate all the questions that everyone asked. It's been a very engaging way to spend the evening for sure. And Maddie and Jared, of course, thank you very much for taking a bit of your time and helping us out here as well.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks, Doug. Bye, everybody.